Okay, Taylor. Thank you, and thanks to the Beacon Group for inviting me and for inviting Brian. I wanted to talk just a little bit about Brian, just for a minute or two, and then we'll begin our discussion. It's really a privilege for me to introduce Brian Tierney, whom I've known since a fateful day in the fall of 2006, when he and I talked for the first time, and it paved my way for the return to the Inquirer. Brian is truly a hometown man. He was born in Upper Darby. He grew up in Springfield, Delaware County, and went to high school at Episcopal Academy and college at Penn here in the Philadelphia area. He's also what I'll call a self-made man, which he accomplished with, and I emphasize the word with, the help of some mentors and friends. The word with is an important one, and you'll be hearing about a lot more about that word later. Brian's had a remarkable career. He's created 3 highly successful marketing and communications companies. And as you know, in 2006, he assembled a group of business leaders and friends to lead the purchase of the Inquirer, the Daily News, and their websites. It was the first time ever that local leaders had purchased a major metro news organization from a national company. And despite extremely challenging economic headwinds, Brian's group improved both newspapers journalistically and propelled Philly.com into the fastest growing newspaper website in the United States. Along the way, the Daily News won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. As I was thinking about this introduction, I wanted to impart something to our audience that they can't find on Brian's resume. Attributes that one learns only through long experience. And for Brian and me, that's a total of 15 years. So these are the adjectives that I came up with. And I think as we talk with Brian, you'll sense these for yourselves. Here they are: creative, resourceful, resilient, optimistic, family-oriented, generous, hardworking, philanthropic, warm-hearted, appreciative, and loyal. Please keep those descriptions in mind as we begin our discussion now.
You forgot handsome too, Bill. Remember?
Yes, yeah, okay. and you're also talking to a former shot putter.
Oh, who? Don't talk about that.
Well, if we're going to talk
75 shot putting champ for the Interact League. Come on.
If we're going to talk about handsome, we also have to talk about athletic. At any rate, Brian, I always think that the best way to begin is to start at the beginning. So could you talk a little bit about your mom and dad and the attributes, values, and skills that you learned from them that have helped guide you through your career?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. And Taylor and everyone here, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet you this way. Look forward to meeting you in person someday. So look forward to that. Yeah, I grew up, as Bill said, my father was born in 1918, went to Roman Catholic high school, graduated in 36, started Villanova. When his father passed away, he felt compelled to stop school so he could help out his mom. He was the oldest in the family of 7. Grew up near the Art Museum on 20th and Brown in that area. Mom was 7 years younger than Dad. She was the baby of her family, half Italian, half, she used to say all Italian, but really her maiden name was Springfield. So I guess there was half, there was some English whatever there. So, but her mom was born in Italy, Catafesta. My mom was a waitress, also owned the hat check concession at the Kona Kai, remember, in the old Marriott Hotel on City Line Avenue, and also had the hat check concession at another restaurant downtown. I'll think about it in a second. And then also, but was a waitress in the Hunt Room at the Bellevue. And fast forward, one of the joys was to be able to, in the mid 90s, when we were the largest tenant in the Bellevue, with our sign outside, it said Tierney Communications, my old agency. The new one, of course, is Byron. Being able to say, thank her for all the hard work that she did, that here's where she was a waitress and now I was the largest tenant with 2 floors of the building. So Dad was a claims adjuster for INA. He loved that job because it gave him flexibility to be able to drop us off at school and pick us up and do interviews in the evening for folks. After 20 some years doing that, he got pushed out of the insurance company North America, and he and my brother started a glass shop called Garrett Glass on Garrett Road, right near the Township Building in Upper Darby. So very much that was part of the roots of the family, and but it was a great group because it was all about, my mom was hard driving, and when you're 6 or 7, you hear expressions like, if you're going to be lazy, you might as well put a millstone around your neck and throw yourself off of a bridge. That's kind of a eye opener when you're 6 or 7 years old. And my dad was also of the attitude too, as well. But both of them said, when you die and go to heaven, you're going to be judged by what kind of a father you are. Never forget that, Brian. So that's kind of an interesting kind of a way to look at things. Anything was possible, though. Huge Sunday dinners with my brothers and their friends and aunts and uncles coming over. It was one night my mom was sure to be off. Those sorts of things were great. And it was a very loving family, and anything was possible. So I'll never forget the time that in first grade when I came home and I had run for I'd run for class president for first graders, and I'd lost. And my mom said to me, what happened? I said, oh, Michael Broderick won. He's a really good guy. I said, and she finally turned to me and she said, well, who did you vote for? And I said, well, I felt awkward voting for myself, so I voted for Michael Broderick. And she said, Brian, if you're going to vote for Michael, why should somebody else vote for you then? And that kind of stuck with me after, like we all need to vote for ourselves in life. And, and we need to have a certain amount of confidence in that. And even when you're kind of feeling kind of scared or whatever, remembering that, vote for yourself. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about the background of growing up. I was the 4th of 4 boys till I was 10. And then my little brother, Michael, came on. Mom was 43, Dad was 49 when Michael was born. So that was
Brian, before we move on, I wanted to, I mentioned the word loyal and appreciative in my litany of adjectives. And I can remember when you were the publisher of the Inquirer and I was the editor, you had a group of older residents from Fairmount who'd known your family, long before you were born or I was born. And they came up to the 12th floor of the Inquirer, and you just were as hospitable and warm-hearted as could be. And I think they must have been friends or neighbors of your dad or mom's family or both.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It was funny because we, the Inquirer building, this iconic building, which we actually, the hedge funds who came in after us, we had more money offered for the building, but we would have stayed as a tenant. They were sure they were going to get more, and they got $7 million less. But anyway, it was one of those buildings. Even though I was running the largest ad agency in town, I'd never been in the building before. Nobody had ever invited people to come into the building. So one of the things is I invited advertisers, members of the business community, friends of my dad from the area, and just make it kind of a nice community asset where you could say, I've been inside the building, because it's a beautiful, 1925, I guess, or so building, and here's where Walter Annenberg sat when he became publisher after his father died, and here's here and this and that. It was really kind of a neat thing to be able to share. So it was, that kind of connection is important. One of the great things about Philadelphia, we're the 4th largest market in the country, but when I've recruited people here from New York, et cetera, on the one hand, they're like, boy, this market's hard to get a hand on. On the other hand, once you do get it, it's like this wiring diagram in this town is amazing. It's, one fellow I recruited one time from New York, he said, like in New York, if you're in finance, you don't know fashion, you don't know this. Here, there's a certain network that you can tap into, which is I think, a real asset for the region in terms of when it can capture that to get things done.
Brian, could you talk just a little bit about how your education, the people you met along the way and what you learned has contributed to your success in business and life?
Yeah, so for whatever reason, so we grew up again in Highland Park, for those of you who know it, right on Academy Lane by St. Lawrence's Church, about 3 blocks up from Pica's Restaurant, which is still the best pizza. If you haven't had it, you should definitely have it. They now have a second location in Westchester, which I heard is just as good too as well. And my brothers had gone to St. Lawrence and on to Bonner, although by the time we moved, my third brother went to O'Hara. For some reason, my mom saw in me that, she had met the president, I guess it was, of John Wanamaker's, had gone to Waldron Academy. And she just felt like she wanted to, whatever it was at this point in life, but, it would have been 1962 that I was going to go there. So I'll never forget that. For those of you who've ever been out there in that area, there's as you approach Waldron, going towards Montgomery Avenue, it's kind of a area of red brick. And I can remember being in the back of my mom's car, going over the red brick road, looking down at this school and seeing it and looking at it and thinking, like, this looked like, I just can't imagine this place. I'm living in a row home in Highland Park, and this is a magical spot. So, and I was accepted, and I went there, and it kind of opened me up to another kind of way of being in people and context. Although there were lots of guys in my class from South Philly and this and that who were very similar backgrounds, just, joined by the importance of the Catholic education and the private school environment. And it was a great kind of a place to be. And also a chance to say, to try things that you maybe wouldn't have thought of in a much bigger school, or, that you were encouraged to give it a shot, and let's give it a shot. So, which is part of my life too. I think a lot of people defeat themselves in the locker room. When we won the Deloitte consulting business on a global basis about 20 years ago at my old agency, we got into the finals, and people around me, really talented people, were like, we got this far, but we're competing against this firm from Amsterdam and this one from London. This is not going to happen. And it's like, let's pretend we won for a second. Because the most amazing thing is my mother was a waitress here in this building. And now I'm the largest tenant with $290 million in billings and over 200 employees. That's the amazing part. We got to the finals, that we won the Deloitte business is not like, how did they possibly do it? We're in the finals, guys. So let's pretend we won and work our way back. How did that happen? And I think that, there's a real part of that in life. And I try to encourage people when I talk to young people too. I talk about, a lot of people spend a lot of time, should I get into this part of the swimming pool or this part of the swim? Just get into the pool. Make sure there's water, get into the pool, and don't overthink it. Start the process. And another, it's there's a great line, and I wasn't some Shakespearean scholar, but there's a great line in Hamlet, I believe, which is, nothing is anything but thinking make it so. And I have it up in my office. I was in 8th grade when I read that line, and it really hit me. It's like, yeah, I can look at things and look at them this way or that way. So I'm going to choose to look at it, in a different way.
Brian, I'd like to talk a little bit about the word with and withology. But before we do, could you tell us about one or two people who really influenced your career in a positive way, either through working closely with them or observing them in the course of your work and wanting to emulate their practices and values?
I've been blessed to have a lot of people, over the years, to be honest with you, that I've tried to learn from. And but just to give, a quick handful of folks, I think there's a guy named Sam McCullough, who was the president of something called Meridian Bank. Remember those? They merged with Central Penn, moved down to here, and then finally had to sell the core states. Sam is a friend now 35 years later. He became one of my first clients way back in the day. And I remember just thinking, here was a guy in his mid-40s from Reading, but he had creativity and he was a kind-hearted person, and let's give it a shot, et cetera, et cetera. Another one was Joe Neubauer. In the early 90s, Joe outsourced all the management of communications to my company, and I sat on his senior staff for weekly meetings. And after about the second or third week, he said, well, you take a lot of notes. I said, Joe, I'm taking notes just on how you handle things. I'm just finding this, this University of Chicago brilliant businessman, the way he would ask questions quietly, numbers, facts, numbers, facts. There was one fellow who worked for him said, when you go into Joe with a big thick deck, he says to you, "Oh boy, something's bad here, I guess." If he liked the thin decks, that meant things were going well in the right direction. So those would be two of them. Dan Hilferty played a really tremendous role. He was a year ahead of me at Waldron Academy. And I knew him just a little bit back then, and I knew him when I was at the paper. We got to know each other a little bit more. That summer of 2010, when the auction was in April and I had to stay till September, and I went through a process of like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm 53 years old. And so I had an opportunity with one of the large holding companies, advertising holding companies, to take one of their brands and build it out into the US, which would have been exciting. And I could have had a piece of equity in that. But it basically would have been flying around looking for Brian Tierney's of the world. This, would you sell me your agency, sir, kind of thing. But that summer, and this was really about, it was meaningful for me at a couple of different levels. One is it was a business opportunity. Also, it was kind of it psychically kind of reinvigorated me. I got 3 different calls from 3 former clients and one who had just been a friend but wanted to be a client. Joe Neubauer, Vernon Hill of Commerce Bank, and Dan Hilferty. Each called me up separately over the course of the summer and said, "What are you thinking of doing?" "I'm not really sure." "Well, if you start an agency, I want to be your first client. If you start an agency, I want to be your first client. I want to be your first client." So we started out day one with those 3 as clients. And it was, I guess it was meaningful in a lot of ways. One is that I also had a business day one, but also it had for me that sense that relationships and doing a good job and working as hard as you can and performing for people, good people appreciate that. I know I do as well. So, and they wanted to reach out to me knowing that I was feeling kind of probably a little beaten up at that point, had never been involved with something that, I mean, to this day, I'm on the board of the Inquirer, but for our group stepping up, this paper would have been gutted because like so many of the other Knight Ridder papers or, newsrooms that have been completely devastated, et cetera, by hedge funds. So, but it was a time that I was feeling kind of vulnerable to have those 3 guys reach out and say, "I'm here for you." So we started small, and that's kind of where it came from. So that was a great feeling.
Brian, in a minute or two, I'm going to flash forward to the present to talk about the effects of the pandemic and the political turbulence. But before we do, could you talk a little bit about Brian Communications Withology, just to give us a sense of that, and then we're going to move forward.
Yeah, for a lot of our clients, we've done podcasts and helped them set up podcasts. And from time to time, I've thought about it. So finally in the fall, and we've done 2 episodes, we're going to probably do 4 to 6 or 7 a year. I don't want to make this too heavy a burden, but the idea of the podcast is called Withology. And the idea is getting behind the scenes of how somebody who has done great things, has been successful, but admits that they didn't do it on their own. They did it because of the help with other people. So the first one was Byron Pitts of ABC News Nightline. Before that, he was on CBS News for years. And he talked about his background growing up in Baltimore. When he was 10 years old, because of his stutter, people thought that he had some kind of mental challenges. He was told that he'll never be able to get into college, et cetera, but he fought. And, now he's incredibly respected journalist. And then the other one was Michael Smerconish was my second guest, who talked about, his early days working for his parents in the real estate business and some of the jobs that he had done in terms of landscaping and things like this. And Michael has been a friend a long time. I filled in for Irv Homer sometimes on WWDB, and Michael was a friend, and I had him as a guest. He loved it. I found it was, for a 4-hour show, you had to do 4 hours of prep, and trying to also run a business made it kind of challenging thing, but Irv was great. It was a fun part in radio times. Back then it was Irv, when we did Inside Story, Irv would be like, "What do you think about such and such?" And I'd say, "Wherever I really feel, oh, okay, I'll take the other side." I mean, that was Irv Homer. It was what made it entertaining. So,
Brian, I want to flash forward for a moment, because this is something that's on everyone's mind among the 60 or 70 people on this call. A year ago, business in the nation and the world was flourishing. Since the pandemic, we probably had as much convulsion as any period since the Great Depression. And I'm wondering, in what ways has this affected both your business fortunes, but also the way you do business?
Yeah, it's made. I feel, first of all, really very fortunate given the nature of our client mix. We haven't had a lot of the challenges that friends of mine that have huge consumer-oriented accounts or other types of advertising business and things like this. I mean, I have clients who had withstanded some tough times, et cetera. But it's we have a lot of healthcare, so the economics at Penn Medicine or Tower Health or AmeriHealth Caritas and Independence Blue Cross. We represent the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, Poker Stars, which has done actually quite well in the gaming world during this environment. So, I think I repeat what you all probably think every day. If somebody told me a year ago that we'd be in this spot, you'd think, oh my gosh, the wheels will be coming off the cart. There's no way this could possibly work. Here we are. I mean, but for this video version of this, I think this would be a lot harder if it was all just audio. So the business has been okay. By the nature of it, I feel very fortunate. People are working really hard and responsible. The part that I worry the most about and the part that I miss, but is the cultural parts to the business. I have, probably a half a dozen or more folks now that I've never met physically, that have come to, that I've only met like this through a Zoom screen. I think part of what makes our company different is the culture of the company. It's the fact that, one particular person on Wednesdays always brings in donuts and so and this, and it's kind of, and I love the whiteboarding. I mean, I think a lot of great ideas come from, we got whiteboards everywhere in the office. Let's just stop and dream and use. That's a good idea. Well, let me build upon that, because that's what our clients are looking for us to take strategy, to build a strategy around facts and information, and then creatively express it. And that could be in a social media campaign, that could be in terms of an event, that could be an ad campaign, that could be a lot of different things. But that interaction part of it, and we've gotten through it and things are going okay, but longer term, that's what I'm really kind of missing. And I worry about that too as well. And we signed up, but we still have some space in Conshohocken. We just recently bought a small building in Ardmore, because it was going to be reflective of where different people live and things like this, and figuring that out. But then right before the pandemic, we signed up for the 27th floor towards City Hall in the Wells Fargo building. Some of you know the Duke and Duke building, Fidelity Bank building, whatever you want to call it. But that's, so we were only in there for 4 months, but I loved looking at the City Hall from one window and this and that. So I went down there a few weeks ago, and on the refrigerator, it was March Madness. So I wrote April, May, June Madness, July. I took a picture, sent it to the entire agency. The madness continues.
Brian, tell us a little bit about how does one make hiring decisions when you can't meet someone in person? What's the process like?
Yeah, well, it's I'm looking for. We're really clear about what we're looking for too, and we say this to people. Here's what we're looking for: smart people who work really hard. So I want to be honest with you, Mr. Candidate or Ms. Candidate, no apologies for that. It's smart people who work really hard, who have empathy for their clients and for each other, and who are fun too. And some are loud fun and some are quiet fun, but I want those kinds of people. At different points in my career, I've been at where people are saying, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard to find this particular art director or this or that. I would say to them, Comcast has a challenge. They have to find 20,000 of these. We have to find one. So let's just find it. Like, don't tell me how hard something is. So that's kind of part of the process. And I interview everybody, no matter who it is, for the final person. So we check references, do all that. There's a series of interviews. And when you've interviewed with me, you've probably gone through 4 or 5 rounds by that point. And invariably, those people are the ones that, people know what I'm looking for. The secret is talent. Early on in my career, when I was 32 years old, I realized, and I had 5 or 6 employees, and we were in the Atlantic building, and Meridian Bank was a client, and Bill Rouse, and I wanted to see every little thing. And then I realized I'm only going to have 4 or 5 employees all my life if I have to see every little thing. I need to sample it like an assembly, like a manufacturing line, and taste it. I want to kind of be copied on it. But there's nothing better than all of a sudden seeing something that somebody who works for you did. And it's like, wow, I didn't do it. And it looks better than if I did it. This is fantastic. This is when you feel like I really have a great company too. And that's kind of what it's been about. I'll jump to one other recruiting thing, getting Bill Marimow, who was running NPR News and the Baltimore Sun and two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, recruiting him, recruiting Mark Frisbee, who was the publisher of the Courier Post, our biggest competitor, but he knew manufacturing inside and out. Mark, Brian, Tierney, love to meet you, just kind of, all right, met for breakfast at a diner so nobody would know who he was and I was. And after a while, it was like, can you come in and run operations and be my chief operating officer? Or when I got into the advertising business, here's an equivalent. In '94, we bought the FCB Lewis and Gilman office. It had been losing money for 4 or 5 years. I knew creative director was key. I hired a big New York firm, the search firm. I go up and met with the woman. She said, I got some great candidates. I said, oh, this is fantastic. Tell me what you have, because creative is the key part for me. This guy here, he's originally from Philadelphia. His father's not well. He'd love to move back. He's with such and such. Okay. So-and-so's with Chiat Day. They're the Apple computers. That's the one that Steve Jobs called up Chiat Day when he went back in to run Apple, said, I will hire you. This guy's creative director of Chiat. Wow, it's fantastic. Yeah. Tell me about him. It's a she. Okay, great. She originally from Philadelphia, wants to move back. So finally I said to this search person, if the filter starts with, I want to move to Philadelphia in 1994 for advertising, that's not what I'm looking for. That's not what I'm looking for. That's too small a net. I want people you don't think would ever want to move to Philadelphia, but you think would be incredible if I could get them. What are you talking about? I said, that's what I mean. Like, let me convince them to come to Philadelphia. So I met at first in secret Donnie Deutsch's creative director, Rich Russo. Finally, the third time he agreed to come down, I had Ben Franklin greet his family at the Philadelphia 30th Street station. We had a stretch limousine. I knew it was important to get the spouse on board. Stretch limousine to show them real estate, et cetera, around the area. His son at one point turned to him and said, Dad, they love us in this town. And Rich Russo came in and we took it from 60 people to over 200 people in 3 years. And the people that I was buying the agency from came to me and said, you're 4% of the profits of the entire company now. I said, yeah, and you're about to earn it out. Yeah, it's been great. We want to buy it back from you. It was like, what? So I never even thought of that. So that was the second sale of an agency at that point in 1998. But again, it was because of talent. It was because of, and you guys who run, I'll tell you one last story too. When I first got there for 6 months, it's a company that had defeat, had been a great agency. When I went in there, they hadn't had a holiday party for a while. So the first day I rented the ballroom at the Bellevue. We had a big breakfast. And again, they hadn't had a holiday party or anything. And I said to everybody there, I'm excited about this. I think anything is possible. We've got some great accounts here, but we need to kind of go beyond that. And I told them my personal story. And if you're excited by this, if you want to, you're going to love it. If you don't, I understand. I'm one of 5 boys. I love my brothers. There's one of my brothers I would never want to work with because he's always down or thinking about what can't go right. So if that's you, I accept it. I love my brother. You just can't work here. You just can't work here. And in 6 to 8 months later, I changed every department head because I realized I just needed I needed it when I left the room, people weren't rolling their eyes and going, what's he now?
Brian, looking ahead.
And the guy I got rid of was the guy who came up with the line, the Marines are looking for a few good men. And he said, you can't do this to me. And I said, Tom, I don't know why we're having this conversation. I've tried for 6 months to work with you. My choice is to make you happy and you don't seem like you're ever going to be happy, or I'll be able to educate my children, and I'm going to educate my children. So I'm sorry this hasn't worked out. Here's a great severance for you, but we're going to go on. And that was a transformational moment when I hired the fellow Rich Russo.
Brian, thinking about the months and the year ahead, but based on your own business and your clients' businesses, what is the economic outlook based on all the signs you've observed?
I think everybody's resilient. I think everybody's going to come back in different ways and reinvent themselves. I think that's one of the great things about us as a people. I think there'll be bumps in the road, and I think there'll be certain businesses that are going to be really kind of challenged, and even restaurants will come back in some basis. Now, there's going to be incredible pain. There has been already. If you were, a Steven Starr or even much smaller shops, I can't imagine what they're going through. But I think that, and we're going to look back on this and say, this was, an incredible period of time, but, and there may be differences in terms of hygiene in offices and things like this. And I think also the idea of, remote working obviously is going to be here to stay. But I also think that I think it'll be 80% of the way it was before.
Brian, are there any clients that you have outside of the medicine area and science who've actually seen their businesses expand during the pandemic, and what's behind it?
Gaming, poker stars, a lot of people home gaming, and finding opportunities like that is one that they've done quite well. Construction management, as that's kind of been able to kind of move on. Torcon is a large client. Belfour, disaster recovery, obviously they're tied very much to where there is a disaster, and Texas so it's a kind of the natural is a very hot spot for them right now. Yeah, my client mix is more kind of corporate. Now, some of them, the Aramarks are, they have challenges. I mean, until people fill stadiums, until people fill colleges and go into dining halls, et cetera, things like that they're going through a transition. But I think the market has seen that, and they'll come back as well.
Have you at Bryan Communications had to do any layoffs or wage cuts or belt tightening that you considered unusual?
No, it's amazing. I mean, I'm very conscious of cost, but our business slightly grew last year.
That's great.
Yeah.
Just for a moment, I want to go back to the Inquirer, which is dear to you and dear to me, and I think probably all of our audience reads it or has read it. What inspired you back in 2006 to think about what then would have been a preposterous idea of purchasing a major metropolitan newspaper from a national corporation like Knight Ridder or McClatchy? What were the seedlings of that inspiration?
Well, a couple different things. One is I had tremendous respect for the role of journalism and the newspapers, particularly, and the role of journalism in the community. I had sold a third agency, T2, and was just an investor at that point in some things like Nutrisystem, where I served on the board for 16 years, things like that. So I was looking at what I was going to do next. I was 48 at the time. So real respect for newspapers, et cetera. The newspapers are up for sale. And I, had given some thought to a lot of different things, hadn't really organized anything, but this is kind of funny how chance happens. I got a call from Joe D. I was in Penn Station in New York, and Joe's calling me up and, hey, Brian, yeah, I hear you're putting together a group of people to buy the Philadelphia Inquirer. And actually, I was not putting together a group of people to buy the Philadelphia Inquirer. It had crossed my mind, but I hadn't taken any steps at all. So I said, well, Joe, nothing immediately right now, always looking at opportunities. And to be honest with you, one of the key drivers for me was that, having run what was the largest ad agency in town, I had tremendous respect for the journalism. I had tremendous respect for the people there and many of the salespeople. But for the most part, the worst salespeople who called on my agency came from the Inquirer and Daily News. I mean, we'd have New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, Channel 6, Channel 3, Comcast Cable, you name it. And I think partly, in the 80s and 90s, running a newspaper was a really profitable business. You had no competition at all. And, I remember, we would have to plead with them and saying, well, we want this ad in on Sunday. Well, if you get it to me Wednesday at noon, but other than that, I don't know what to tell you, so it was that kind of a thing. Whereas if you're selling the fifth radio station in a market, you have to hustle, come up with ideas, et cetera. So we knew we could make that better, and we did. We also thought that Philly.com was underperforming, 16 million page views a month. The Boston Globe was at 40 million page views a month. So you felt like, gee, larger market, why are we doing that? Our goal was 30. In the end, we increased, because I brought in a brilliant young guy from McKinsey who had been a journalist, who worked at McKinsey, Ryan Davis, who Bill, to run Philly.com. He grew it, and for the last 12 months we were there, the growth every year went up, but for the last 12 months, we was 97 million page views. And Nielsen ranked us as the fastest growing news site, not in the US, in the world, was Philly.com. What was the challenge? Ad rates had gone from $18 a thousand when we bought the paper to $1 a thousand. So you had a 90-some% drop in ad rates based upon this thing called Facebook, started in 2006. You probably heard of it anyway. And then the other one was the recession of 07 into 08 too as well. So we were, those were the kind of challenges that we had. So, but it was fun. And it was fun to go out to the plant and meet the drivers, to go to the drivers early on and say to the Teamsters, who were the roughest and toughest kind of guys, and saying to them, I've got this group of Philadelphians who are interested in buying it. They're business people, though. They're very philanthropically oriented, but they're business people. Well, I said, are you willing to kind of work with us? For instance, the Daily News and the Inquirer travel on separate trucks. You literally could go to a Wawa and see 2 Inquirer trucks there, one delivering the Daily News, one delivering the Inquirer. Can we make some changes like that? And we were able to make those sorts of changes, which really helped kind of cut the cost, but didn't impact the product at all. And that was really kind of helpful as well too. So,
Brian, here's a wild card question from the acquisition. As we both know, the ultimately, because of the economic headwinds, your group had to declare bankruptcy, and many of those investors lost a parcel of their investment money. Yet people like Bill Graham, who I think invested $30 million, continue to hold you in the highest esteem, work with you all the time. How did that happen?
Well, this was interesting. The investor group we put together was as diverse as the community. It was men and women, black and white. It was the Carpenters Union Pension Fund, and it was Bruce Toll, a non-union home builder. It was a really diverse group, as you know, and everybody signed a pledge that they wouldn't try to interfere with the editorial process of it. But I thought it was really important to have a diverse group of folks who were going to own it. This was the first ever kind of in the country, and everybody signing a pledge, et cetera. And I think it was a benefit of a couple things. One is transparency. We communicated with them as you would expect to be communicated as an investor, and having been an investor in things and things that have gone well and things that have gone poorly, I appreciate honesty, openness, et cetera, et cetera. I think it really helped us too, to show them that compared to our peer group. So every month we would give them a report on how we were doing versus the top 25 newspapers. And when we bought the papers, we were 23 or 24 out of 25 in ad sales. And within a year, we were in the top 10. And for the last year, we were the top 5. So transparency, communicating well, them seeing what was going on, them feeling like compared to our peer group, we're doing much better than most. And, so that's why all of them, this was an amazing thing. Every one of those investors wanted to be part of the bankruptcy auction and reinvested, and wanted to go. I told them to stop at 100. They went to 120. And then some of the hedge funds bought it and then wound up selling it back to some of my investor groups like Jerry Lenfest. And then I advised Jerry, but I had already started the new company a couple of years later and wasn't ready to come in and kind of rerun the Inquirer at that point, but had made other commitments and promises. So I think and one of the things, advising clients now in terms of these things is, even if you have really bad news, if you're upfront, you're open about it, you make sure that, the key audiences see how hard you're working at it, that you're relatively doing better than most in the category, it really helps.
Brian, I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll turn it over to Taylor to let the group ask questions to you. So my last question is this. When you peer into your crystal ball, what are the biggest challenges you see facing your clients and the other businesses you're familiar with over the next year and a half?
I think, most of our clients kind of get it, is that you have to constantly be reinventing yourself. You have to constantly be thinking. You can't get comfortable. You have to kind of figure. You can't lose energy, or you have to get off the stage, kind of thing. And I think that that's kind of a part of it, and to be open to it. I describe, to young people working for me, if you're getting on a plane or back in the day, a plane or a train. But anyway, read something you wouldn't normally read. Expose yourself to something you wouldn't know. If you're going to like, I personally like, I'm online constantly looking at news sites, but I do find the efficiency of a printed product for me because somebody has already curated it. I've now skimmed through the Inquirer and the New York Times. It took me about 25 minutes. There's a lot of things I want to go back on, read, because on a website, we're kind of, here you've purchased the product. As you know, Bill, on a website, one of our tactics is it's kind of like the annoying guy, you go into a retail store and it's like, sir, one more thing. Can I show you one more thing before we go? I've got one more. And that's what we're trying to do on a website. We're trying to get you to click one more time, click one more time, click one more time. Whereas the other one is already kind of sold. So it's key to just kind of keep opening yourself up to new things, reinventing yourself. I was talking to somebody who works for Jeff Bezos yesterday and was talking about his attitude of, it's not this or that. Let's try to figure out a thing with this and that. Let's not keep trying to like make it easier for ourselves necessarily. Let's try to figure out how we would do this and do this and do this and do this. And I thought that was an interesting kind of a way to look at life and business.
I'm about to turn things over to you, Taylor, but I wanted to add one footnote to what Brian said that I think is a special piece of advice in this era of fake news. And that is advice for all of you. Read broadly, read deeply, and read skeptically. If you read an editorial in the New York Times, read one about the same subject in the Wall Street Journal. Understanding the poles of the possible truth will help you get closer to really forming an informed opinion. So Brian, I'm going to say thank you. And Taylor, take it away.
All right, Bill, thank you. And again, Brian, that's fascinating stuff. I've got some things I want to share with you a little bit later. But before I do, I would like to now just open it up to questions from members of the CEO Roundtable. Let her fly. This is the interactive part.
All right, I'll start. Hi there. First of all, Bill, thank you very much. You asked really insightful questions. So I always think that's part of a really great program. So Brian, it is wonderful to virtually meet you. I've been in healthcare my whole life. I began as a nurse, and I always tell people that's who I am in my innermost core. I think having heard you talk today, that at your innermost core, like Brian, you will always be an ad man, and I will never, ever probably get this opportunity to be with somebody who has your level of experience. So as a solopreneur, what advice would you give from what I think is your innermost core?
So a couple of different, I talked about a little bit about, that sense that a lot of us allow ourselves to lose in the locker room before we give it a shot to get out on the field, kind of a thing. That attitude of, when Bill remembers one of the unions called me, they were sick of my cheerful prattling. So when they next came into my office, I had a wooden sign with a brass plaque on it that said "Chief Cheerful Prattler," and I had it in the front of my desk. And I had, I guess I've seen so many different reasons, in terms of people that I've known and their backgrounds, my own story. Growing up in, a loving family, a feisty family at times with an Italian mother, an Irish dad, and, and feisty at times in terms of things were tough and phone not working and telling friends, oh, we're having some problems with the phone line, but phone had been turned off, so you just got to figure it out. Like, let me figure it out so I can like lament it. And you go through moments where you kind of feel that sense of like, I can't believe what's going on. And at the other time you have to just say, okay, what can I make of this? And how do I, move forward from here? And that doesn't mean doing something big and silly and foolish. But it's just kind of, nothing is anything but thinking make it so. And then there's another quote I have up on my wall. I stumbled upon it. It's by Ovid, O-V-I-D. He was a Roman philosopher and like around the time of Christ being born. And it's, let your hook always be cast. When you least expect it, you will find a fish. And that sense of getting out and about, and you can easily, when I was a young guy, I, going to a chamber of commerce thing, didn't feel like going to the Chamber of Commerce thing, would probably rather not have gotten up an hour earlier, but it's like, I'm going to go with my business cards and a piece of paper and talk to strangers. Hey, how you doing? Hi, my name is Brian Tierney. What do you do, sir? What do you do, ma'am? And just trying to meet people and stuff like that. And, all of a sudden you kind of build a network kind of thing. And then making sure I instantly put them into what I call my Rolodex, and nobody who works for me knows what I'm talking about, but keeping that file of contacts and all that sort of thing. But, and to being able to kind of connect those dots over the years, and also connecting a lot of dots and doing a lot of favors and things, and not looking for a short-term return. And sometimes later on, like a year later or 3 years later, kind of something comes back. And, I'll tell you, this will be about a 2-minute story. I mentioned Sam McCullough. It's 1985. I have one employee. It's our part-time babysitter from Cabrini College, and it's Tierney and Company. And I am, my clients are the Atlantic Building is a client, and they're $500 a month, and another one's $800 a month. And I'm going to law school at Widener at night, and I'm going to be a lawyer, which I did finally become a lawyer, pass the bar and all that stuff, make my parents happy. Never practiced law, but I did want to get that done. So 2 kids at home, et cetera. I would occasionally write to business people and try a thoughtful letter. And I never got a response, but one was I wrote to Sam McCullough. Dear Mr. McCullough, with your purchase of Central Penn National Bank, it's interesting why you're moving down from Reading. And I think it's really interesting that you've done this, this, and this. And I don't think, though, at the same time, there's enough visibility around blank, blank, and blank. And, about 3 weeks later, my assistant comes in and says, the Federal Express man's here. The Federal Express man? The heck? Because I didn't get any Federal Express packages back then. So S.A. McCullough, Meridian Bancorp, Reading, PA. I open up a monarch-sized letter. Brian, I received your letter several weeks ago. I'm going to be in town for the Pennsylvania Bankers. Can you meet me for breakfast at the Franklin Plaza, now the Sheraton? Oh my God. So I ran to the phone. It's 10:02. And then I realized, well, they guarantee 10 o'clock delivery. So I should probably, let me wait for a second. If I call too early, it's going to look like I'm doing it. Waited about 45 minutes, finally called around 11, scheduled the breakfast, had breakfast with Sam McCullough. I am just turned 28. I walk outside with him, really nice guy, Sam was. And he gets into his car and he turns to me and says, so what would a program like this cost, Brian? I hadn't even thought of that. So it was like, well, Mr. McCullough, it depends upon the size and scope, and the scale and what you were planning. Give me a number, son. I'm thinking like, well, my other clients are like $600 and I'm not, so I said, well, it would depend again. He said, Brian, a number. I think $5,000 a month would be an investment. It would be a good investment, and blah, blah, blah. And this, okay, well, let me give it some thought. And he leaves. So on the one hand, I am so excited that I finally met like a person. And then like, you know what I mean? It's not just State Optical, Dr. Harry Brightman, who was a great guy. But when I got him on the front page of the Inquirer business section, when they had the front page of the Daily News had a business section, the front page of the Business Journal. And finally, Dr. Brightman said to me one time, how do I get on the front page of the paper? And I said, well, Harry, you've been on the front page. He said, no, it's like, I mean, the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer where it says Philadelphia Inquirer. And I was kind of a wise guy at the time. I said, I'll tell you what, you shoot your marketing director or he shoots you, but give me a couple hours so I can tell him, crazed optician shoots marketing director. I said, other than that, I don't know how to do it. Then he kind of, this is, the front page of the Inquirer intersection is as good as it gets. After some tragedy. So anyway, so I go back to my office and I'm thinking, it's so exciting. Like, how do I close a deal though? I feel like, what do I do? I don't want to look too like, what do I do? And randomly, I got a call from, and this didn't happen very often, a guy who I'd worked with when I worked in Washington at the RNC, Republican National Committee, and later served briefly. The way I get back to Philadelphia is they said there's a job in the Reagan administration in Bala Signwide at the SBA. And I said, it's Bala Kinwood and I'll take it. And that's Philadelphia. Anyway, guy calls me up and says, hey, Brian, what's going on? Good. Some of us are driving up today. Yeah, what's up? The president's going to announce this new tax plan, which was the Tax Act of '86. We're going to go to Williamsburg day one. Then they're going to go the next day to a dairy farm. And then you guys have some high-tech corridor out there, Route 202, Rouse Corporate, something or other. And yeah, he said, well, that's the third day. oh, okay. Well, we're driving up now, man. Could you meet us? And it was like, sure, sure, yeah. So I'm thinking like driving out with my 8-year-old Mercury Monarch with the shifter on the count, thinking about Sam McCullough, like, how do I close a deal? It's around noon that day. True story. We meet out there, meet with some of the Rouse Associates people. Bill Rouse greeted us briefly. Okay, how about this location? No, it's got to look more modern, get in cars, drive to a different part of that campus. It's huge, it's hundreds of acres. How about this? No. After about an hour and a half, I turned to one of the guys and I said, you want a modern looking building? What about that one that's kind of like brushed aluminum? Yeah, that's good. There's no tenant there. They don't move in for another month or two. I said, oh, great. Who's going to be? Meridian Bank is consolidating all their asset management. I said, like Meridian Bank in Reading, Sam McCullough? He said, yeah, that's their new offices. That's where So this is like 5 hours after I left Sam. So I said to the guy what do you think of that office, that building? They go up, look at it. This works great. Brian, do you know anybody who would put up $10,000 or $15,000 to pay for the stage and the speakers? I could figure that out. I have no idea. My net worth is about, I had put $8,000 on a home. So my net worth was probably 10 at that time. Anyway, I said, yeah, sure, I could figure that out. And this is just hours later. So that night I get home and directory assistants, I had heard that if you lived in the Reading area, the nice community was this town called Wyomissing. Long story short, 411, Samuel McCullough, yes, he's listed. Call up, Sam, hello? Sam, it's Brian Tierney. What can I do for you, son? He's thinking I'm a stalker. And I said, Sam, I know we only met for breakfast today, but what do you think if I could get the President of the United States to make a major policy address in front of your new building out in the Great Valley Corporate Center? And long story short, 3 weeks later, Meridian says, hi, chief, from high-tech territory. Meridian Bank becomes a client and a friend for years. Bill Rouse becomes a client, so we do all the communications tied to his idea of building Liberty Place, all because I wrote a letter. All because I wrote a letter. So, a lot, I go back to just, you just never know, you know what I mean? Other than, there's certain things that you can't turn back on, but other things, give it a shot. And a lot of people defeat themselves in the locker room too.
Thank you for sharing all those stories. That was spectacular.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Brian, I have a question for you. I'd love to know your thoughts on what private equity and hedge funds are doing to local news organizations. And what one nugget of advice would you have for them? Yeah,
it's, you're seeing some interesting things in terms of Boston are very wealthy and, fella purchased it and has invested in, obviously, Jeff Bezos down in Washington, D.C., Patrick Soon-Shiong in L.A., who's a really successful, wealthy guy, did it down there. The private equity guys who have purchased them for the most part are horrible. I mean, they're buying them for the real estate assets. You can run a newspaper that had 80 people by selling off the buildings, paying a very little price, selling off the assets, having people live, working in buildings, which literally rain coming in on it and taking it from 100 people in the newsroom to 12. It's not a long-term strategy, but you can make a lot of money in the short-term thing. And, some of these people like Alden Capital are very secretive about it. You think about this, they're controlling the news in huge parts of the country, and yet they've never done an interview and they don't want you to know who they are. And they don't, I mean, if it was any other kind of a business, we would be, very much shocked about it. I mean, you'd want to know, well, where are we buying this medical equipment from? Where's this other stuff coming from? But for whatever reason, by just staying really low and behind the scenes, they're able to do it too. So it's really tough. And, it's, the economics of it have changed. I mean, it used to be before, if you wanted to reach somebody, you wanted to be in that newspaper and be on that website. Now, Facebook and Google can track you everywhere you go. So they know that you were thinking about a car, you're thinking about actually a convertible, and all of a sudden you're seeing ads on every site you have for a convertible. And newspapers don't have that sort of, level of detail. Earlier on, newspapers, some of us talked about it, is, let's pull our stuff together. Since we're the ones with the content, why don't we create our own networks and this and that? And partly it was, a lot of newspapers in the year 2005 were family owned, third generation, legacy, kind of very proud to own it, but not necessarily cutting edge kind of things in terms of things, and waited too long. And, it was fun to be on different panels where somebody would, I remember being on a panel with a really great guy from ESPN in New York, and he was talking about, well, our economic model and I said, your economic model is great. You're bundled into my cable bill. I don't watch ESPN too much, but you're getting like $1.50 out of my monthly bill times 100 million households. You start the day off, right, with like, you get like $800 million in revenue before you have to sell an ad. So, I mean, if I could bundle my newspaper into my cable bill, I'd be a home run. You know what I mean? That would be a great way to do it. But now you're seeing with cord cutting, even ESPN has had cutbacks and layoffs recently because of cord cutting and, not having so much of the, that part of it in there. So.
Thank you.
Brian, Marie Basagio, I have a question. Early in the discussion, you talked about how hard it is right now just to maintain the culture. It's such an important part of the business, but it's more difficult with COVID. And you also talk about just the appreciation that you need to show, and you need to also lighten it up in the office and all. You mentioned that the one company hadn't even had any celebrations or not even, any kind of coffee, donut, whatever. I can't imagine that, listening to you for a little over an hour now, that you've let that hinder your business. So what are you doing in your business to make sure that you're still driving your culture and maintaining that culture, and also bringing that appreciation in and keeping a little bit of the lightness and keeping the employees in touch with each other?
Well, we're having weekly, half hour Mondays at 1:30 kind of get-togethers where we talk about highlights in the company, this and that. And I have it so it's not like me saying what it is. It's a committee designs what it's going to be, and it's fun. There's some laughs, playing games and things like that sort of thing. Also supporting, being more mindful than ever when somebody comes to us saying, I'd like to do this with Broad Street Ministries, or what about this with Mighty Writers and this outreach program, and could we support this? I'm just saying, sounds good. That sounds good. That sounds good. I want things that our staff can kind of feel personally committed to. And I'm really listening a lot. And, when it's the investments, a couple of $1,000, I mean, if it was $150,000, I might feel differently about it, but it's like, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. The committee has come and 8 of our employees want to do that. Let's do that. I'm trying to make sure we do those sorts of things. I try to make sure too, that I just, on these kind of things, when I look at sometimes colleagues' faces and, whether they have young kids at home or whatever they're going through, or they're feeling certain, is to, after it's over, if somebody looks kind of sad, I just call them up and say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? I just wanted to check in, and trying to kind of be mindful of that too, as well. And people really appreciate it too, because it is a rough time. I mean, if you're, everybody's got some challenges that they're dealing with that you don't even know about, right? We all know that. I mean, there's just something, there's a health issue, there's somebody they love who's having some challenges, there's something else that's going on, they're worried, their spouse's job maybe, I mean, something's going on. So that sense of just really trying to show that you care, and, and expressing empathy even more so. And it's really more of our job now than probably in good times too, to try to do it. But this is really, that's a kind of, so all the other things I talked about, but also trying to make sure that I get some one-on-one time with people who look, or I haven't spoken to her in, other than a group thing, in 3 weeks, hey, McKenna, what's up? We just wanted to check in. You and your husband, you were at your, up to see your mom. How did that go? What, that sort of stuff too.
I think what you're doing is great though. And I would imagine from what you're saying that you probably have a much lower attrition rate than others in your industry.
Touch wood, we've really been fortunate that way too. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And, we've, it's been great. Like, we don't, I don't want to sound the wrong way. Like, and I, at different times I may be different. Like, I could have a signboard around my neck walking down Broad Street saying, please hire me next week. So you know how it is. I mean, when you're in the professional services business, somewhere there's a merger you don't know about, somewhere there's a client that's, retiring, and you're going to have to figure out how to renew and keep it's just part of, going through that with Bell Atlantic merged with 9X. And then, then they merged with GTE. And at each point of it, it was always, why do we have this agency in Philadelphia? So trying to make sure you're showing, it's not a historical accident. We really do great work, blah, blah, blah. Let me, yeah, you guys did the James Earl Jones stuff. No, but let me just explain to you the strategy behind it and this and this. And, I remember one time when they, GTE was purchased by Verizon, and then one part of it was headquartered out of Dallas. And this fella in Dallas was, the client part was just, and I understand it was just this guy in Philadelphia wants to come down and see me, and no, I can't do that. So finally it was like, after about 3 weeks, it was, you're not gonna believe this, but I have to be down there the entire week. I'm in Dallas, just for another client. Is there any chance you'd have 15 or 20 minutes? It was, all right, great. I had no other client meetings down in Dallas, but I just had to get face to face with this guy, because if I felt like if I don't get face to face, I'm not gonna be able to kind of get the relationship up to the next level.
Well, guys, if I can just jump in here, we could go on for days today. And I just wanted to thank Brian, you very much. Bill, thank you for a phenomenal presentation. My three big takeaways are the importance of culture, the importance of talent, and also reinventing ourselves out there right now. And I've often been on my office wall is the quote, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So you've got to look at things change. We're in very disruptive times, but also filled with plenty of opportunities for all of us out there. So again, we're going to have to break out. But again, Brian, Bill, thank you so very much on behalf of all of us, and look forward to staying in touch, and best to you both for your continued success.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for part of it.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
all.
See you. Bye-bye.
And we're going to go back to breakout rooms for those of you who can stay. And then after that, that'll be it. So thank you, everybody.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.